Hey everyone, just wanted to let you know that if you have little ones around that do not know about the birds and the bees yet, maybe listen to this episode with some headphones on because we're talking about Song of Songs. Wanted to give you that heads up. Let's dive in.
Hey everyone, and welcome to the Spoken Gospel Podcast. My name is Seth, and we are doing our third episode on the Song of Songs. David,
Woo!
how
Here
are
we
you feeling?
are. I'm feeling like I think I got over the hardest part. And like I said in the first episode, I came in kind of trepidatious, but like with a lot of joy and hope that I could take you somewhere that I found really beautiful. And I think we got there.
Yes.
And I'm very thankful for that because I've just felt like really moved and changed by this book, like as a father, as a husband, a father of boys, you know, and I'm like, I want to show Seth some of the stuff I've seen here. And I feel like I've done that.
I think you did.
And so I'm happy about that. And now I feel like we get to enter into a part of the conversation where we have a little bit more history and we've repped these muscles a lot more regularly of like, okay, how does this story fit into the biblical story?
Yes.
So how do we do this all the time?
Yeah.
Maybe means it'll be our worst episode.
Maybe our most speculative and where we play armchair biblical theologian.
But you ended the last episode with the question, okay, I understand this book as a song about a woman's loss of her virginity. What is this doing in the Bible? Yeah,
I think after you hinted at an answer in the first episode, which was something like there is wisdom. This is part of Solomon's wisdom tradition, and because it is in that tradition, the loss of virginity and the sharing of the marriage bed becomes a metaphor for also the tree of the knowledge of good and evil and the fate of humanity as bound up in these two events. So I was like, okay, that's cool. But I'm also just thinking as why is a romance between a man and a woman and the consummation of a marriage in my Bibles? Because I think I could argue on a historical or even a literary merit point why a whole bunch of other things are in my Bible a little more easily. Like, the Torah's in here because it tells the story of how Israel became a nation and the laws that helped establish it. And you've got the history books that tell you the history of God's chosen people throughout time.
Yep.
You've got the prophets who are critiquing God's people. You have the Gospels where you have Jesus and the letters that comment on his life. Like, okay, I've got those.
Why this one?
And then maybe the closest parallel would be Psalms, but these are personal songs reflecting on the goodness of God in a person's life that have import because he's the king of Israel, and they are calling Israel to faith in that one true God. One thing I noticed here is like no one's called to have faith in God.
Right.
It's like really a personal poem.
It's a very human poem.
A very human poem about a relationship of love, and you have these calling out to the daughters of Jerusalem. So anyway, all my questions is like this breaks some of my categories for how I normally think about a book of the Bible, and makes me think, why on earth is it in the Bible, and how do we understand it in light of the biblical story?
Yeah, these are really good questions, and ones that I wrestled with for a long time as well. And I think at the most basic level, I think we have to make sure we don't overreach for a purpose for this book. Not that larger purpose isn't there. I think it is, and we'll get there. But we can't skip over the nearest purpose for it. So as you were going through the different books of the Bible, like, why is the Torah here? That makes sense. So okay, cool. One that popped into my head is, why is Ecclesiastes in my Bible?
Yes.
Because that one's kind of a downer.
Well, you gave me a good answer for that one already.
Yes,
it's like the book of Proverbs tells us how life should be, and Ecclesiastes tells us why, or attempts to explain why life doesn't work the way it should.
That's
I'm
right.
Okay, those things fit for me. But yeah, you're right. Ecclesiastes does feel like another odd book in the canon.
Right.
Yeah.
And so I think with the Song of Songs, then you have this extremely practical, in a sense. It doesn't read practical, right? But it addresses an extremely practical reality that human sexuality is a gigantic part of our reality.
Okay.
I mean, just look around even today. It is always being talked about. It is always a hot button issue.
And throughout time, the god of sex is probably the one that was most worshipped.
Yep.
In any ancient society.
That's
right.
right.
That was the favorite god, was the god of sex.
I mean, you look at cults and paganism in the past, they always looped sex into it. You had fertility cults, and there was even questions around how does our human sex talk to the spiritual realm, and then you have so many things about like how to be in human relationships with each other, adultery, divorce, how to treat women with dignity, how to be a man, and like so you have even outside the Bible, within the Bible you have all of that, but even outside, human sexuality, what to do with it, is just at the top of the list of things that people are concerned about.
Yeah, that makes sense. So like, why is a story about sex in the Bible? It's like, well, because everybody's like, in one way or another, all cultures revolve around sex.
Yes.
The continuation of a population of people
depends on it.
Yes. And the breakdown of like sexual abuse, sexual exploitation, or good sex within marriage
ruins cultures.
Ruins or blesses cultures.
That's
like,
right.
Yeah, and it's like that's why you would want to have a book about sex. And it makes me think too, like, we have a bunch of laws about types of sex not to have. And this gives us the what to fill our time. Like, if we're not supposed to have sex in all these ways, it begs the question.
Yes.
What would
good, healthy, wise sex look like?
And
that's
so
right. Yep.
This fills that place.
It does.
In the Bible.
That's right. And so there's a lot of things to talk about there.
Yeah.
And so one of the things is that this song has regularly been seen as kind of this beacon of light in the Bible, because it actually celebrates human romantic physical love, especially in a culture, and I mean in a Judeo culture, in a Christian culture, in a Western culture, that can think of sex in ugly terms or dark terms, or that it's something to be hidden or tucked away or not talked about, or it's shameful. And the Bible is now has this book in it that says if it's treated wisely, the way it's designed by God to be treated, human sexuality is something to be celebrated, enjoyed, and intoxicated by. And this is something that, the purity culture, I think, that I was raised in gave a head nod to, but did not teach properly.
It was like, hey, sex is going to be great when you're married, and here's a whole bunch of things not to do.
Right.
And it was like kind of focused more on the prohibitions.
Right. More on Proverbs than Song of Songs.
Yeah.
And it was like, I'm really scared of sex.
Yeah.
But I don't think I can celebrate it.
And to like maybe to give some credit, it's like, I mean, sex is kind of all teenage Seth maybe thought about.
Right.
And so it's like, it makes sense that you have a fear-based response where it's like the only thing we're going to do is going to tamp down the teenage desire of younger people.
But it's interesting. It's like, why is this book in our Bible? It's because God knows us, and it's like from a male perspective, like all teenage Seth, all teenage David thought about, all teenage boys think about is sex.
Pejorative.
It's pejorative.
I thought about
other
games.
things. We also thought about video games. Calm down.
In books, I read a lot of books.
I read a lot of books too, but it was always there.
Yeah.
And that's just a reality of being human.
Yeah.
It's how we were designed. There's something, and it's like there's something good in it, that this husband that you hear from isn't ashamed of how he feels about his bride. He's not like, I'm so sorry that I find your breasts lovely. He doesn't, there's nothing wrong with that desire. And that's actually a good thing in which like God has made man, but it has to be done in the proper context, or else, like you said, it's going to wreak havoc on the world. Same for a woman. It's like, you've got this precious thing, and you feel more vulnerable, you feel more exposed. How can you treat that? Well, finding a wise husband, and so I've been thinking as I've been studying this, that I've got a 6-year-old and a 3-year-old boy. You've got a
no, I'm just joking. 11, 9, and
but
5.
But 9-year-old boy. Right. And so we're going to have these conversations, as a lot of our listeners have had, I'm sure, with their children. And I'd be like, what am I going to use? What's my resource? And as I've been studying this book, I'm like, this is, I think, the God-given textbook for how to talk to your kids about sex. because it does so many things extremely well, and it is something that every single person has to have wisdom about in order to live in this world wisely. And if you don't, it can wreck things for you and those around you. And so I'm like, I think the reason this is in our Bible is for the same reason Proverbs is because we need to know what the wise, good life looks like. We need to know what wisdom is. It has to be revealed to us.
Especially when it concerns sex.
Yeah. And so I think that's at like the nearest level that we cannot reach beyond and should not try to reach beyond is this is a book that shows us a wise view of sex and virginity, marriage and virginity. I think that's also very important because we know in the New Testament, we have a high value on singleness and virginity. Jesus was single and a virgin. Paul was single and presumably a virgin. I mean, he was a Pharisee before he was a follower of Jesus, so I don't think he was philandering before that. He was, according to the law, blameless. So I don't think he, had sex outside of marriage. And he's like, I commit to any of you if God calls you to it to, stay single. And so this song also offers this view of virginity as something to be prized and protected and valued, and not only as something to escape from in order to experience actual joy. It prizes both. It does that in a really almost seemingly contradicting way throughout the song, that it can prize virginity and physical union almost equally. But I think it's doing that on purpose.
Yeah, I think that's really insightful. And like, we shouldn't seek to find we shouldn't overly spiritualize something that we need practical wisdom for. Right. And it's like
I don't think we try to do that with the Proverbs.
Right.
It's just like, oh, there's wisdom in multiple counselors.
Yeah.
But what does it mean?
Right.
It's like, it means ask other people for advice.
Right. That's right. But in the same way that Proverbs kind of goes cosmic for a second.
Yes.
How is Song of Solomon inviting us to go cosmic?
Yes. And I think it does. Like I said, it does reach deep into the biblical story and plays with a lot of biblical imagery and themes. But I just don't want us to miss the nearest purpose and reference of it is a wise way to handle your body when it comes to virginity and sexuality.
Yeah.
It's like, that's just really good. I think we've talked a lot about
that's primarily what we talked about.
That wisdom is in the last two episodes. So if you're like, well, they're not talking about it, go listen to the other two episodes. We did talk about it. I think here now what we're going is, okay, in the canon of Scripture, what's it doing? Because I think we've even talked a bit about how it's functioning in the canon within a canon in the Solomonic literature.
Yeah, within wisdom.
Right. It's kind of maybe balancing or filling out why you shouldn't just be afraid of sex, but enjoy it, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So broadly speaking, in the canon of Scripture, what's going on?
Yeah.
You have a question?
And part of my question is motivated by the fact that another one of the few facts I know about Song of Songs is that for a long, long time now, the Song of Songs is read during Passover. Among the Jewish people. So there's clearly like something about the national identity of God's people. They've found some sort of parallel in the Song of Songs. And so I'm like, that's really evocative to me.
Yes.
And obviously they've thought deeply about the Torah and the Bible and the Old Testament and the Song of Psalms. I'm like, what is it? And then obviously too, we have something about the very identity of God's church being wrapped up in marriage. We've talked multiple times about Jesus Christ being the groom and we being the bride. And Paul will say in Ephesians 5 that men and women having sex is a picture of Christ and the church.
Or men and women being married.
Oh, yes. And presumably
things happen in
the union,
marriage. Yes,
the union
happens.
of marriage,
yes.
the consummation of marriage as being a picture of Christ and his church. So there seems to be something like canon spanning.
Yes.
Absolutely. About sex and marriage.
Yes.
That speaks to the very identity of the people of God and the story God wants to tell with his people.
Yes.
Which is like, I'm curious about.
Yeah. And I think maybe the way we should view the song in that canon is not that this is now God's definitive statement on what sex is in the canon of Scripture, or how to view the redemptive historical theology of marriage within the story, but that this is a high point celebrating it and showing its wise use and application.
Can you say that a different way?
I don't want to read this song and try to map on every single part of the biblical story to it, or it's and not that you were doing that. That is how this song has been, I would say, misused in many ways.
When the husband says, your hair is like a flock of goats. Well, this is back when Abraham was running down the hill to fight.
Sure. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. Or my favorite one is, my lover is like a sachet of myrrh between my two breasts.
Okay.
And a famous commentator, centuries ago, said that Christ is the sachet of myrrh and the two breasts are the Old and New Testament.
I think that was Augustine. Is that Augustine?
I don't think it was Augustine.
I feel like that was Augustine. I feel like I heard that recently. I think it might be Augustine.
But anyway, we don't want to do that.
Yeah.
But yes, it is having a larger conversation. So let's get into it. So let's look at some, and let's also address this. The categories that the song highlights for us. Mm-hmm. So some of those that we've already talked about, we can dig in a little deeper. Mm-hmm. So garden is a regular thing. Not only does the bride refer to her body as a garden, but within that garden there are pomegranates and lilies and mountains and things that just evoke Eden,
the Garden of Eden
to us. And a man and a woman having being naked in front of each other and unashamed, and eating the fruit of its proper time. Like, there is a lot of garden imagery, and a lot of commentators have picked up on that.
Yeah.
This is not one of the areas where people are arguing.
Yes.
There is a lot of garden imagery in here. So we can talk about that maybe.
Yeah.
To begin.
And then this is something that we keep assuming, but marriage as well. Like, the context in which this sex happens is marriage.
Yes.
And so I think that's also interesting to me, that it's like within the song, marriage is being prized, the place in which intimacy is supposed to be experienced. And then as we go backwards in the story to the Garden of Eden, we're also going back to another marriage that kicks off the story of God's people.
Yes.
Beginning with Adam and Eve.
Yeah.
And so, that's why I'm also like interested by that.
So yes, and there's a lot of wedding imagery. There are wedding processions described in the song. These processions and litters going down aisles and coming to one another. They're referred to as my bride, my beloved. There's all this wedding imagery thrown in here as well, and the veil. So anyway, lots of wedding imagery. So yes, you should be thinking about the context of a wedding and a marriage whenever you're reading this song. Okay. So you're right. So in the garden, I think it is interesting that you've got this paradigmatic way that humans are supposed to relate to one another. And we've talked about this already a few times, that you've got a naked relationship between husband and wife that has no shame in it. And in their union, they are fruitful and multiply and bless the world. And that there is a blessing that comes out of marital union in the form of children who have been raised wisely, but also in the form of two people who aren't alone and who are enjoying each other without shame. That relationship is itself a blessing, and that relationship in itself blesses the world. Yes, and I think too, if we're thinking like, what does Song of Solomon say to the story of God's people, of which we are a part? It's like the blessing is not just a relationship in which we are not alone. It's not just children, but it's also like the civilization that comes from them and the subduing of the earth for its good, the stewardship of the earth for its good. Yes. So like from beginning in that, an act of consummation, the whole world is stewarded well. Yeah. And that's the calling all humans are meant to enter into, is the stewardship of the world based off a prior act of vulnerable love. Like that's like, Yeah, that's right. Yeah, we are called in to enter into a family that orders the world according to God's wisdom. And I think we can do that through marriage or through virginity, just that we enter into both, prizing them wisely, and we can enter into that and bless the world through it. Okay. And so, I think you're right. It's interesting, I think, that you have in the Garden of Eden in the fall, you have a locked garden. which is a regular theme in the Song of Songs. And it's referring to the bride's virginity, that no one has entered into her garden. You have this locked garden, and in order for someone to enter into it and enter into this paradise we're discussing that produces all this fruit and blesses the world, this death that she went through has to occur. She has to shed blood and has to die and be beaten and bludgeoned in her virginity in order to have entry into this Garden of Eden and have paradise and children. And so it's interesting there, just that very evocative picture of, you have the Garden of Eden with the cherubim guarding it with a flaming sword. It is a locked garden. And how do we enter back into it? It's through death, through the death of Jesus, the shedding of blood, our own death in submitting to him. Like that he, our husband, brings us back into his garden.
Well, even in the Eden narrative, like the Cain and Abel, or like Adam and Eve are exiled out of the garden. So, let's go back for a second, because we had this perfect relationship, and then we kept talking about how the loss of virginity was like tied back to the moment of failing to choose the right or choosing to eat the fruit before it was time.
That it could be that.
Yeah. And so
if the daughters of Jerusalem awakened love before it so desired, that would be like taking the fruit of the knowledge of good and evil and eating it before God let you.
Right. Yes. And because Adam and Eve do this, they're cast out of the garden.
That's right.
And the rest of the story of the Bible is them trying to get back in. And Cain and Abel bring their offerings where? To the front of the garden, in hopes of accessing the Garden of Eden once again. They are the lovers knocking at the door. And then as the story progresses, you have the tabernacle and the temple covered in garden imagery.
Yes.
And priests coming and knocking at the door, and yet only get given entrance once a year or however often. So like that same movement back towards the garden is the movement of God's people throughout the story of the Bible. And I'm just riffing here, as like you have Cain and Abel coming to the garden, not entering, but the choosing of Abraham's family. And it's through Abraham's family that you're given, there's this long preamble to this moment where God marries his people on Mount Sinai.
I will be your God, you will be my people, is his confession of marriage to Israel. And that's I am my beloved and he is mine, which is repeated 3 times. Along with, you have the 3 warnings to the daughters, and you have the 3 declarations of I am my beloved and he is mine, reflecting on and repeating God's covenant love to Israel.
And then after that, you have instructions for a garden.
Yes.
You have instructions for a garden.
Yep. And we're going to marry and we're going to move in together.
And we have this hope that God and his people will enter into the garden once again. But Exodus ends with Moses being unable.
That's right.
God's presence falls.
Yep.
Like it's there, but Moses can't get in.
That's right. Yep. It's also fascinating to think about how this movement into the garden. So they're exiled because they took the fruit too early.
Yeah.
And they were moved out of the garden. So if we were trying to stay in the imaginative universe of the song here, I don't want to oversimplify it, but just so we have to stop speaking all the metaphors, to engage in unwise sex or premarital sex or something like that, extramarital sex.
Yeah.
Let's call it unwise sex. I like that. Yeah. Unwise sex is to take the fruit too early.
Okay.
And then that leads to a broken world, broken relationships, and exile from the garden. How do we get back into the garden? Well, it can't be through sex, because that's what broke it. But in a divine twist, that is how we get back in, because what is God's promise to Adam and Eve on how they will get back in? It's through Eve's offspring that you will be brought back to me.
Interesting.
And so it's through Adam and Eve, you guys working through your shame and broken relationship issues, entering into wise sex in order to create a family that blesses the world, that leads to the Messiah, who then will go through his own death and resurrection to bring all people into the garden. Like that's
really cool. That's really cool.
So garden imagery is everywhere.
Yeah, and like the pursuit of entering the garden by the people of God is the central theme of the Old Testament and the quest of God's people. I guess what I'm getting at is like, why was Passover? Why was this read at Passover?
Oh, okay.
Because it's like this is the central quest of God's people, to be in
the garden.
With their
Yeah.
God.
Yes. Yeah, I think that has to be part of it. I did not study why it's read at Passover.
Yeah.
But if I was to dialogue with that for a second, I would also posit, I guess, that the Passover was the moment when Pharaoh's line was cut off, that the line, the descendants of Pharaoh's children were cut off, that the fruit of his unwise sex or whatever is cut off, whereas the children, the product of wise sex, was preserved. So much so that later on, those kids have to be atoned for in order to not work in the temple because they belong to God. He bought them with blood, it says in Numbers. So now they're owned by God. And so they have to buy them back in order to not work in the temple, but to just be normal citizens later in Numbers. Because that was just this huge event. And so at the Passover, you then they're reflecting on this event and they're celebrating more children, more union between husbands and wives, creating more generations that will bless the world. You see what I'm saying?
I don't see what you're saying.
So in the Passover, you had you cutting off of a evil line.
The angel of death coming in and the firstborn of Egypt.
Of Egypt being cut off. That's right. So cutting off of the generations of the unwise.
Yeah.
And a preserving of the wise children.
Through blood. Through like
a sacrifice.
Through a sacrifice. Well, just thinking too about that bloody moment in the Song of Songs.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so here then you've got a preservation or a continuation of the wise line of God at Passover, celebrated in a song that talks about marital union that will create more generations of people through the shedding of blood. In wise sexual union. I don't know why they do it, but that would be a guess, because you do have this picture of in the Passover, out of a bloody door, children of Israel come out to enter into Canaan, which would be the Garden of Eden. Was supposed to be the Garden of Eden,
where the milk and honey are.
That's right, where the milk and honey are.
Yeah.
And so in the same way, out of this bloody garden that this woman has sacrificed, would come children who would inherit, hopefully, a new Garden of Eden.
Yeah, and it makes me think too, like that moment of consummation in the Book of Song of Songs, and not to try to put too many inappropriate parallels, but there was a real sense in the Hebrew story as we get to Solomon that he's this new Adam figure.
Yes, absolutely.
Who brings the presence of God. He can go in, like the palace surrounds the temple.
Yes.
The priests are offering, the cloud falls, the nations are blessed, people from all over the world start coming, experiencing God's kingdom. There's a very real sense that Solomon rules Eden.
Yeah, that's right.
He is the king of Eden.
Yes.
Where the place of milk and honey, where all nations are blessed.
Yes.
So there is this sense that he was so close, or he was the closest since Adam.
That's right.
To being that figure.
That's right. And so here in the song, I think you also have a picture of a wise Adam-like, Solomon-like gardener. He is a shepherd and a king, is what he's called, and that's who he is. We didn't talk about that, but those are his designations. He's a shepherd, and then she calls him a king. Yeah. And so who else is a shepherd king? Like you start thinking about these tenders of the fields who are also kingly. Yeah. And he is this Adam-like, Solomon-like shepherd king, who in acting wisely with his bride brings the Garden of Eden open to the world. That is the picture.
Right. And then in Solomon's fall, what is the hope? For another Adam,
one like him.
Another Adam like Solomon.
That's right.
To bring a consummation for God's people.
Yes.
And especially after again, I don't know what's appropriate and what's not anymore.
Sure.
However, but the point is, there's a real anxiety on the part of God's people that they have lost their relationship with their lover.
Right. Have we gone so far that we'll never come back?
And the prophets themselves often call themselves watchmen.
That's right. Yes, you're on it. Yep.
Calling Israel to protect her purity.
That's right.
Which they fail over and over again to actually protect.
Yes, which God will call Israel, reflecting on her past before her mighty fall. He will call her, O Virgin Israel. Like he celebrates her virginity before she gave herself over to other false gods. and calls her a virgin. And then she
Yeah.
gave that priceless commitment to God alone, over to another.
Yeah. There's a sense that the anxiety of the woman over the losing of her virginity in marriage
Yes.
is the anxiety of God's people
Yeah.
after
They've lost their innocence.
they've lost their innocence.
Will God come back and love us again? Will he still find us beautiful? Who is he and where did he go?
Yeah.
And the song reminds us that he is the God of covenant love who always loves his bride, and he's right here.
Yeah. And the story of the Hebrew people ends in exile.
Mm-hmm.
God's temple is destroyed.
Yes. Where is he? I sought him and found him not.
And found him not. So the end of the story of the Hebrew Bible is the people of God asking the same questions of the woman
Absolutely
in the
right.
marriage bed.
Yes.
It's like, because they also come back home.
Yes.
They come back home to Eden.
Yes.
They come back home to where Solomon used to reign.
Supposed to be. Yep.
And they're asking, like, but where is God?
But where is God? And the book ends with this: come over the mountains, bound over the mountains, be like a stag, and come over the mountains. And in the near referent, that means, hey, nuzzle in, my beloved, like enjoy my garden. But it can also be, this picture of Israel calling out to God, saying, God, you're far away.
Yeah.
Come leap over the mountains. Behold, he comes, like riding in.
Come back to the
Come
temple.
back to the temple.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally.
Which then we get to Jesus
Yes.
then, right? He
Yes.
is the stag over the mountains.
That's
He's
right.
the one, God in the flesh, come to live in a very intimate way with humanity and God's people.
Yes.
That God has never done so before.
Here we go.
Yeah.
Okay. So think about this. This is a little mind stretch, but as we
Yeah.
get into you opened it up, so now I have to
Okay.
talk about it. The intimate way that God becomes flesh is a theme in the Song of Songs.
Okay.
So think about this. I hinted at it in an earlier episode, but the man in the song is both virgin and non-virgin.
Okay.
He is sexually inexperienced. He's
In
never
that-
had sex before.
Yes.
So he's a virgin.
technically a virgin.
Yeah, but he cannot enter into the experience of losing his virginity as the woman can. So he's
Right.
kind of a non-virgin.
Because he does, yeah. Like
You don't
her,
call you wouldn't call a young man a maiden.
right.
Like he just doesn't.
Bachelor, yeah.
Yeah, so it's just not the same
He
connotation.
will not have the same experience.
That's right. He inhabits both worlds,
Okay.
virgin and non-virgin, and only by inhabiting both worlds can he transfer wisely the woman from one to the other. Okay, now think about the first Adam. Adam inhabited two worlds. He was both the dirt of the ground and the breath of heaven.
Okay.
He's heaven and earth.
Yeah.
Woman came from him,
Okay.
but not from heaven and earth. And she
From the side.
transitions
Yeah.
into this beautiful thing by the help of the one who is both. And so is the job of this Adam-like gardener to redeem and transfer this bride from virginity to beautiful wife. This is what Jesus does when he comes as God-man, heaven and earth. Since he's both,
Yeah.
he can, like the husband in the song, transfer us from broken or virgin or whatever,
Yeah.
like only human,
Yeah.
into his divinity, that he takes us from human and makes us into himself. And that when we're unified with him, it's like the Eastern Orthodox Church talks about the process of theosis. Like we start
become like
becoming like him.
Yeah.
And like that's
Yeah.
like a picture of salvation that we
Fascinating.
can see in Jesus. Is
Yeah.
he's the virgin, not virgin, God man who makes the transfer
Fascinating.
from one to the other. It's pretty incredible.
Is there? I mean, because we're just saying the word virgin a lot, but like the prototypical virgin I think about in the Christian story is Mary.
Yes.
Jesus is born of a virgin.
Yes.
Is there anything we should be in conversation with here?
So-
in like, if Jesus is the stag over the hill, the groom meant to comfort the anxious people of God, and he comes or is that just a detail? That's just another prophetic theme, but
Yeah.
it's like it just feels so like.
So I feel a little hesitant to engage with this, and I'll
Okay.
tell you why. In the up until the 1800s,
Okay.
the Catholic Church, this is how they interpreted the song.
Okay.
Was a song of the Virgin Mary,
Oh.
and it was often used in the Catholic Church to venerate Mary.
Fascinating.
That in the 1800s was radically debunked even by the Catholic Church
Okay.
and most Catholic theologians. And only in 1963, I believe, has any Catholic thing been published that tries to bring this interpretation back up, and it did not meet with much good reception. And so even the Catholic Church has struggled. They've used it, but they've struggled to keep it.
They want to identify the woman of the song as Mary.
Yes.
And I guess that's not quite my
It's not what
question.
you're trying to do. I'm just giving you
Yes.
my trepidation
Yes,
on the topic.
Yes.
Yes. So that's why I'm like a little hesitant to even
Maybe we can come
engage.
back to that question
Okay.
because the story is that if Jesus is the groom
Yes.
coming to the anxious bride, his people, he, through his life, will assure her of her loveliness
Mm-hmm.
and make the garden and the world as it should be.
Right.
Like
Yeah.
that's what's
I think
happening.
if we were going to do anything with Mary, I think a beautiful reflection is that in Mary you do have a daughter of Jerusalem, a virgin, precious, priceless daughter of Jerusalem, who has to go through a very different kind of death in order to bring this multiplicative life. It's not in entering into a physical union with Joseph that she creates Jesus, but it is in a surrendering her whole life and her social standing and her body and everything over to the will of God.
Yeah.
That she then, and there is a beating and blood, and through that doorway of blood comes the Son of God, and it's not through sexual union, but it is through a surrender and a death and a vulnerability. And that is the call. I mean, ultimately, yes, Mary did this beautifully, but it is the call of the Christian life that if we are to birth Christ in us, experience a new birth of Christ and become like him, we must do what Mary did, and we must surrender ourselves over to the will of God and let him do what he will do. It's this very, for us as Christians to think about putting ourselves in the position of a virgin on her wedding night, right? To put ourselves in a vulnerable position of like, God, whatever it is that you want to do, I'm going to have to give myself over to you, even if it's a little fearful. Yeah. And like, it reminds me of Proverbs 3, which is like lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he will direct your paths. And then it goes into the women's stuff after that.
The women's stuff?
The women's stuff, the lady folly, lady wisdom. And it's like their voices and everything like that, and the warnings against sexual promiscuity, and it's like, give yourself over to the will of God. Yeah. And I think that's like the wisdom theme packing in here too.
Yeah, and well, as we think about when we follow wisdom, we gain life. That's the story of the Bible. That's right. And so it made me, and maybe I'm just getting weird with it.
I think we're past that.
But the hope of God's people was that they could enter back into the garden.
Yes.
And commune with their God, and so bring life and flourishing to the world.
Yes.
And there was a way in which Israel, through their defilement, could become a virgin again through sacrifice.
Yes.
And the priest could enter into God's presence.
Yes.
And through this action, the life of God would continue to trickle out into the world.
Yeah.
So there is a sense in which Mary fulfills the hope.
I understand.
Of God's people. She, as a representative Israelite, a representative virgin, meets God in the garden. Yes. And life comes from her. Yes. The true groom. Right. Israel has been hoping for since exile.
Yes.
Who then rescues his bride.
That's beautiful. Yes, I love that. That was worth the journey. That's beautiful. Oh, I love that. Yeah, and so there's that I think is beautiful. So the theme of virginity, the theme of the garden, it was all there. Do you think we've exhausted enough of the theme of wisdom? Like, do you think we've talked about that enough? I want to make sure we've landed those planes.
I mean, we're kind of going on two tracks. We got our wisdom life track, but also the bride groom track. And we've just kind of started to explore Jesus as the groom hoped for by anxious Israel in her exile.
Yeah. And it's really fascinating as we think about that then, that, and I think we've said this, but I want to make sure we hammer this home, is you do have the way Jesus walks through the story of the song is just beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
That he goes through this death and almost like the woman on the night leading up to the consummation for his purpose for coming to earth, he frets, he worries, like, you know, in a sense, like he cries up in the Garden of Gethsemane, like, let this cup pass from me. There's this worry, like I don't know if you could say Jesus worried, but
are you saying Jesus is the virgin in that sense, or is he a groom worried over the fate of his virgin?
I understand.
Yeah.
I have trouble not seeing it both ways.
Yeah.
Because he went through a death, you know, and shed blood in order to bring life.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's through Christ that we are born again.
Yeah.
And so he is also the progenitor of life through blood.
Mm-hmm.
So in a way, he does inhabit that role of the woman as well in the song. But yes, I think let's stay on your track too. That so we are the woman
in need of consolation,
because we've become broken.
Mm-hmm.
Our innocence has been taken, and we wonder, will a husband find me beautiful again? Mm-hmm. Is that where you're getting?
Yeah, that's the question. Yeah.
So that just adds so much more beauty and reality and color to Ephesians 5, you know, or even the parable of the wedding feast, you know, where the husband, you know, calls the young women to himself at the wedding feast. Or also like in how Paul talks about our wedding with Jesus in Ephesians 5, that he sees us as spotless, blameless, without stain or wrinkle. Yeah. And I'm like, Jesus, come on. You know what I've been through. You know I let the watchman go a long time ago, and I've not kept my garden. And yet you still call me beautiful and holy and without spot. You gush over me the way the husband gushes over the woman in the song.
And Jesus, from the first moments of his ministry, is preparing for that wedding.
Yeah.
Like that, his first miracle is turning water into wine.
Yeah.
And what is he doing? He's preparing a wedding for the bride that is currently blemished.
Yes, and there's a reason why he turns water into wine in jars of ritual purification, because in this wedding, shame arises in a really strange way. Like a wedding's not supposed to be a place of shame, but all of a sudden a cultural shame sets into the wedding because the wedding is run out of wine. And there's about to be this cultural scandal that would put the whole event to shame, the whole union to shame. And so Jesus covers over the shame of the wedding and brings honor, dignity, beauty, and people start gushing over how good the wine is, how good the wedding is, because of this wine that Jesus brings. He purifies the wedding of shame.
Isn't that one of the compliments the lovers give each other, that they're like wine to one another?
Oh, yeah. Your love is better than wine.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Oh, your love's better than wine.
So Jesus is the groom who comes, prepares the wedding for his blemished bride so that
he can cover her shame.
Convince her of her loveliness, purify her, and then bring her into Eden.
Yes.
Which is the end of the Revelation.
That's right.
He opens the gates to Eden.
Yes.
For all people.
Yeah. There we go. Oh man, that's really beautiful.
Yeah, and it's fascinating. I'm just reading. That's the end of the story, is the opening of the gates of Eden.
Yeah.
And even the moment of the cross is described as an act of consummation. Yeah, this is Ephesians 5, verse 25. Paul's speaking to husbands, but he says, husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her, so that he might sanctify her and make her pure, without spot or wrinkle or any blemish. And then he goes on and he says this in verse 31. Therefore, because of the way that Christ has acted towards the church, a man shall leave his father and mother and hold fast to his wife, and the two will become one flesh.
Yes.
In the act of consummation. This mystery, the mystery of sex, is profound. And I'm saying that it refers to Christ and the church. So there is something pretty profound here, in the same way that the song represents the marriage of God's people in Israel. There is a way in which the song, because it's about the consummative act, is representative of Christ securing the marriage of his church as well. And that just seems really profound that those things are all bundled together. Because it's not something I would intuitively, it feels almost blasphemous to connect sex to the act of Jesus' death and resurrection, like his sacrifice in my place.
I understand what you're saying.
Like,
because they aren't related.
Right.
They aren't. Otherwise, we're pagans. Because that's how pagans would receive salvation or placate the gods, through sex.
Yes.
They would actually conjoin those two ideas. But here, he's like, this is a mystery.
Yes.
It's a picture.
Yes.
So it's a metaphor
Yes.
of Christ and his church. They're not the same thing.
Right.
And in having sex, you're not awakening the life that Jesus earned through.
No.
Like
It's the opposite.
that would be blasphemy.
It's the opposite.
It's the opposite.
Jesus' death and resurrection, his death for our purity, is the hope to which sex points.
I understand, yes.
Like, wise sex is vulnerability met with love.
Yeah.
And in Jesus' death and resurrection, we get that par excellence. Like, the vulnerability of our stained selves meeting the love of God in Jesus Christ dying for his bride.
Yeah. I think the other thing to just harp on there, too, is union.
Yeah.
Is the two becoming one flesh. So that is all the way back in the Garden of Eden. So this will always resonate in the ear of a Jewish reader when they're reading about a marriage ceremony and two people entering into a marriage covenant and having sex. The two are becoming one. And here in the gospel, we become one with Jesus. He prayed this, for us, that we would be one with him as he and the Father are one. That is marriage language, that he would be in us and manifest his beauty in us. And one commentator I read talked about how, yes, it prizes virginity and becoming a bride equally.
Yes.
And when it talks about becoming a bride and what that is doing in the song, it can almost sound like it's disparaging virginity, but it's not. So it holds them in tension. And here's why I'm bringing it up. In virginity, as you enter into marriage, you're bringing in this isolation, that you've never known another man in this way, that you've never been joined with someone in this way, that I am, I think the quote from the commentator was, you are autonomous, but you're not free. And so, and he started talking about it kind of culturally, that we all have this deep longing to be known and loved, to be fully seen and fully accepted.
Yeah.
And in union, those two realities clash together.
Yeah.
That, yes, you can stay cloistered off and you can stay, again, I'm not making virginity pejorative here, but you can stay a virgin and you can just keep yourself away from union. But without that joining, you will not be fully known and fully loved in this picture. So with Christ, it's like he wants you to put down your guard and actually let you know that he sees you, knows you fully.
He knows all the blemishes.
He knows all the blemishes.
Yeah.
But he loves you fully. And that's pretty amazing. That union, which also reminds me of this quest to get back into the garden, this quest to press into the presence of God.
Yeah.
When Jesus died on the cross, this mystical thing we're talking about, what occurred there, what happened at the temple? The same thing that happened in the song. A veil is torn away. Like beaten and bloodied, and took away my veil in this consummating moment. And whenever Jesus dies in his consummating moment and his blood is shed, the veil covering the temple is torn. And union with God is possible again. And we can enter into the garden. So like there's so much collapsing in on each other here.
Yeah, it makes me like, I think I started this conversation, I was like, why on earth is a series of poems about the honeymoon night in our Bible?
Right.
And the more we think about it, it's like, how could it not be?
Yeah, totally. And this is why even like rabbis have said, and why this the case for canonicity for this song is unimpeachable. It's always been in the canon.
Every Jewish person has always considered this part of God's
and
Holy Scripture.
fought for it tooth and nail. Like the quotes that rabbis have said about why it must be in the text are just as gushy as the song itself. Like I think one was something like, I'm going to mess up the quote, but it was something like, all the days of the world are not worth the Song of Songs. It's just like, it better be in there. And so just getting to your point, like once we start to understand it rightly, not that we've done it perfectly, but even as we start to peek our head into this, it's like, how can this not be in our Bible?
Yeah.
It's everything.
Yeah.
It's just huge.
Yeah. It's like the creation of the world is consummated with a marriage.
Yeah.
The end of the world will be a marriage with our Savior. Jesus Christ comes as a groom to console his vulnerable bride. So it makes sense that you need some sort of thing like Song of Solomon in the Old Testament to round out, to give us this picture and to help us understand why marriage and sex and the relationship between a man and a woman is the way the world will flourish. It come into what God intends for it. Yeah. Anyway, there's more. It's cosmic.
It's cosmic.
And so I'm like, oh, okay.
Yeah. It's cosmic. And then it's also very close.
Yeah.
That it's also just about something that every single human person has to deal with. What to do with my sexuality.
Yeah.
And it gives you a wise path to do that and to join the cosmic story God's been telling.
Yeah.
It's pretty cool.
It's pretty cool.
That's the Song of Songs.
Man, this was awesome.
This was fun.
This was awesome. Thank you, David.
Absolutely.
And thank you guys for listening. I hope you enjoyed our conversation through the Song of Songs, and we will see you next time.
Thank you for listening to the Spoken Gospel Podcast. Spoken Gospel creates short films, devotionals, and podcasts like this one. Everything we make is free because of generous supporters like you. To see our resources, visit spokengospel.com or subscribe to our YouTube channel. Thanks for listening. See you next time.